The break room was almost empty when she walked in and set the tray down. Not beside him, in front of him, a full plate, hot food, steam still rising. The man at the corner table looked up slowly, the way a person looks up when something happens that their mind has not quite caught up to yet. His hands were wrapped around a paper cup of hot water. Just hot water. The same thing he had been drinking at this table alone every single workday for nearly a year. He had not told anyone. He had not complained. He had not asked for a single thing from a single person in this building, or in this city, or in this country. Not since the day he arrived with one bag of clothes, one bag that was not clothes, and a little girl who needed a future he was determined to build with his own two hands. He had come here as an engineer, or he was working as a clerk. He had come here for his daughter, and he had been quietly starving himself at lunch every day so that she could have new shoes. And this woman he barely knew, had simply noticed. If a story like this deserves to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe. You will want to be here for what happens next. Because what she did next and what it unlocked in a man who had spent 5 years making himself invisible is the kind of thing that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. This is the story of Jacque Castillo, a father, an engineer, a man who gave everything and asked for nothing, until the day someone finally refused to let him disappear. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this story speaks to you, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. His full name was Jacque Castillo. He was 44 years old. He had been born in Guadalajara, Mexico in the summer of 1981, the second son of a man who repaired electrical lines for the city government and a woman named Judith who taught mathematics at a secondary school and believed, with the unshakable certainty of someone who has spent 30 years watching young minds open, that the right education could change the entire direction of a life. She was not wrong. Jacque was the proof. He studied civil engineering at the University of Guadalajara, graduated near the top of his class, and spent the next 12 years designing and overseeing structural projects across the Jalisco region: roads, drainage systems, 3 pedestrian overpasses. And in 2015, the project he was most proud of, a reinforced concrete footbridge over the Lerma River connecting 2 rural communities that had been separated every rainy season when the old wooden crossing washed out. No ribbon was cut, no politician stood for a photograph, but the people who crossed it every morning knew his name, and for an engineer that is the only recognition that truly counts. He met Clara in 2010. She was a school administrator. She laughed at everything, including things that were not funny, and somehow made them funny by laughing. Anne was born in 2014. They named her for no particular reason other than that both of them said it at the same moment when the nurse asked and decided that meant something. Clara died in 2018. A car accident on the highway between Guadalajara and Zapopan on a Tuesday afternoon in October, on a road Jacque had driven 100 times himself and never thought once about. He spent 4 months after that barely functional, moving through the rooms of his own life the way a man walks through a building after an earthquake, checking every wall for cracks. Then he made a decision. He had a daughter who was 4 years old. He had a country that felt now like it had taken everything it was going to take from him. He had a cousin named O'Brien in Columbus, Ohio, who worked in warehouse logistics and called every few weeks to say there was work here, real work, that Columbus was growing, that the schools were good, that a man with his background would find his footing quickly. And Jacque arrived in January of 2019 with Anne in a second-hand red coat 2 sizes too big and 2 bags. One held their clothes, the other held a hand-painted ceramic Talavera tile the size of a dinner plate, deep blue and white, a pattern of interlocking stars that had hung on the wall of his grandmother's kitchen in Guadalajara for 40 years before she pressed it into his hands the week before he left and told him it was not a gift. It was a loan, and that he was to bring it back someday when things were good. He had wrapped it in 3 shirts and placed it in the center of the bag and checked it, without thinking, every time the plane hit turbulence. It hung now on the wall of his apartment on Livingston Avenue in Columbus between the kitchen and the small hallway. Not hidden, hung precisely at eye level. Or in the first place, a person sees when they walk through the front door. It was the one thing in the apartment that did not look temporary. His engineering credential was not recognized in the United States. He had known this was a possibility. He had not known it would cost $3,200 in examination fees, require a sponsoring licensed engineer, and carry a processing backlog of 16 to 20 months. He had not known that the job recruiter who had emailed him before he left Guadalajara, the one who said credential recognition was largely a formality for someone of his qualifications, would stop returning messages 6 weeks after Jacque arrived. He kept a folder on the bottom shelf of his closet labeled in his neat block print, Engineering U.S. Licensing. He opened it sometimes. He had not stopped opening it. There was one thing about Columbus he had not expected: the public library on East Main Street. He had walked in during his 3rd week, still raw with cold and the particular disorientation of a man who has misplaced his own identity somewhere over the border, and a woman at the front desk had handed him a library card without asking for much, without screening him through anything invisible, and he had stood in the engineering section for a long time, running his fingers along the spines of textbooks he already knew better than the authors who wrote them, and had felt for the first time like a person who simply existed somewhere rather than a problem someone was in the process of deciding what to do with. He worked at Summit Ridge Foods Distribution Center on the east side of Columbus. His title was Receiving Clerk II. He'd worked there 3 years and 7 months. He lifted, sorted, logged, and signed manifests with a 99.3% accuracy rate, which was the highest in the department and which appeared in his quarterly reviews alongside the word reliable, as if the 2 facts were equal, as if a man who designed bridges and a man who was good at not making mistakes on a clipboard were the same category of person. He earned $19.40 an hour. After taxes, after rent, after utilities, after the $200 he sent to his mother Judith in Guadalajara each month because she was 68. Her knee was getting worse, and there was a neighbor who checked on her but no pension that covered the gaps. The after groceries and Anne's school supplies and her winter coat and the field trip fees and the small amounts that kept arriving with no warning the way small amounts always do, after all of it, there was not much left. There was enough. It mattered deeply to Jacque, structurally as a load-bearing fact, that there was enough. He tracked everything. Anne was 10. She went by Annie at school, which Jacque understood and did not argue with. Though at home she was always Anne, and she answered to both without any visible confusion, already fluent at 10 years old in the particular skill of being 2 things at once without losing either one. She was in 4th grade at Livingston Elementary. Her teacher, Ms. Rawl, had sent home a note in October that Jacque kept in the drawer beside his bed and read sometimes on the harder nights. It said that Anne was the strongest reader in the class and asked questions that made the other students think in new directions, and Ms. Rawl considered it a privilege to have her. On Thursday evenings, Anne translated for Jacque at the pharmacy, standing beside him with her hand light on his arm, her voice steady and calm, interpreting the pharmacist's fast, technical sentences without impatience or embarrassment, as naturally as breathing. He loved her for it in a way that occasionally made the floor feel unsteady under him. His routine was fixed and precise. Up at 5:15, the kitchen still dark, coffee made in silence. Anne's lunch packed, always something warm in the thermos because she had mentioned once, 2 winters ago, that cold lunch in winter made her sad and he had never forgotten. Out the door at 6:30. 2 blocks to school, then 6 blocks to the bus stop. 40 minutes on the bus, usually reading, the book held low, not performing anything. On the dock floor by 8, lifting, counting, signing. Lunch at the corner table in the break room, hot water in a paper cup. The cup flattened afterward and saved for the next day. Back on the floor at 12:30, off at 5. Bus home by 5:45. Anne already at the kitchen table, already deep in whatever book had her that week. Dinner made, homework checked. He ate standing at the counter, always. He sat for a few minutes in the evening with the Talavera tile, not praying exactly, but being near something that still knew who he was. Lights out at 9:30. This was his life. He did not describe it as hard. He did not describe it as anything at all. The soul came off on a Wednesday, not gradually, though it had been threatening to for weeks. All at once in the school parking lot in the rain at 7:55 in the morning when Anne stepped off the curb and the entire front half of the right shoe peeled back in one clean motion, like something that had simply run out of patience. It slapped against the wet asphalt with a sound she described later with 10-year-old precision as being exactly like a fish. She did not tell him. He had already left for the bus stop. She went inside the school and spent the morning with her right sock soaked through, her toes pressed against the bare inner sole, and she said nothing to anyone because she had been watching for months, watching the lunch bag stay in his locker, watching him put 2 items back at the grocery store and keep 1. Watching the quiet calculation behind his eyes every time she needed something. She had understood without being told that he was working towards something and she was not going to interrupt it. But Ms. Rawl noticed at 10:30 during a bathroom break. She saw the walk first, the slight mechanical wrongness of it, and then she looked down. She saw the shoe. She saw the careful way Anne was distributing her weight as if she were trying to keep something from being known. The school called Jacque's cell phone at 11:05. He felt the vibration on the dock floor, saw the number, and something went cold in his chest that had nothing to do with the air coming off the loading bay doors. He found his supervisor, a stocky man named Pate, and said he needed 5 minutes. Pate waved him off without looking up. He called back. A school secretary told him Anne was fine, nothing serious. Could he come when he had a chance and bring a change of shoes? He said yes, of course, an hour, and then he stood very still for 4 seconds after hanging up, and then he walked to the break room, which was empty at that hour, and he sat at his corner table and placed both hands flat on the table. He sat there in silence for 6 minutes. He was not panicking, he was calculating. How long she had been walking that way, how long she had known and said nothing. What it said about who she was becoming, this child who translated for him at the pharmacy and curled her toes inside a broken shoe for weeks so that he would not have to change his plan. He was calculating the way he had been trained, is in terms of load and tolerance and what a structure could bear before it begins to bend in ways the eye cannot see. He was still sitting there, hands flat on the table, when the door opened. He had seen her in the weekly floor briefings. Brenda Weber, Regional Operations Director, the woman who ran this facility, and 2 others, who moved through the building with the compressed efficiency of someone who is always solving the next problem before the current one is finished. She was in a gray blazer, she had a folder. She had clearly come for something specific, and she stopped when she saw him, because his face in that unguarded moment was not the face of a man who expected to be seen. He straightened immediately, his expression closed, his hands came off the table. Brenda Weber looked at him for 1 beat longer than a director looks at a receiving clerk. Then she went to the supply cabinet, took what she needed, and left. She paused in the doorway. She looked back. She came back at 12:15. He was in his corner with the paper cup of hot water. and she walked in carrying a cafeteria tray with 2 plates on it and set one in front of him without a word. Chicken, rice, green beans, steam still rising. The same $9 cafeteria meal he had walked past every single day for 11 months. She sat across from him and said she had ordered too much. This was not true. Both of them understood it was not true. Everything in Jacque assembled to refuse. The pride that had kept him upright through 4 years of carrying qualifications that no one here would look at. The fierce private discipline of a man who had decided that needing nothing was the only form of dignity still completely available to him. He looked at the plate. He thought about Anne's wet sock, her curled toes. 3 weeks of silence from a 10-year-old who had decided on her own, without any instruction from him, that his plan was worth protecting. He picked up the fork, not out of gratitude, out of something more complicated, a recognition that this particular refusal, today, was a performance he could no longer afford to give. Brenda ate her own meal without speaking for 2 full minutes. It was Jacque who broke the silence. This surprised him. He said his daughter's school had called. Her shoe broke. He needed to leave early. Brenda set down her fork and looked at him. The look was not pity. It was more specific than pity. It's more personal, the look of someone who has just been struck by a word they were not expecting. She asked how old his daughter was. He said 10. She asked her name. He said Anne. He said it the way he said it at home, the full, clean sound of it, and without knowing why, he added that it had been his wife's choice, that it was the one word they had both said at the same moment when the nurse asked, and they had taken that as a sign. He did not usually say things like that at work. He did not know why he said it now. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had a daughter too. Her name was Melissa. She was 26. They did not really. She paused and stopped and started again. Things between them were complicated since the divorce. She said it in the tone of someone reading a sentence they wrote years ago and are no longer sure they believe. She had been in her office every hour Melissa was growing up, Brenda said. She had told herself she was building something for her. Melissa had experienced it as her mother simply never being home. And now Melissa was in Portland with a life of her own, and Brenda was not part of it. She did not know how to ask to be let back in. She was not even sure she had the right to try. She said it quietly, almost to herself. You know what that is, do you not? And Jacque did know. He'd been carrying it for 5 years without ever once hearing it named. That specific and exhausting attempt to love someone through logistics, through lunch thermoses and shoe budgets and hot water in a corner where nobody looked, through subtraction, always through subtraction, as if love were a debt he was slowly paying down. He had come here to give everything. He had not planned to be so completely seen doing it. He said he needed to leave at 2 to pick up his daughter. Brenda said she knew. She had already spoken to Pate. She told him to go. He left. He walked to the shoe store on Morse Road and he stood in front of the display and he looked at the pair he had been looking at for 11 months and he put them on his credit card, the one he had promised himself he would not use, and he walked to the school. Anne came out of the office and saw the bag in his hand. Her face did something he would not try to describe. She put both arms around his waist in the fluorescent hallway, and he stood there holding his daughter, the Talavera tile 4 miles away on the apartment wall. And he thought of it anyway. The letter from Human Resources arrived on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the shoe. It was not a firing. It was a workforce restructuring notification, which is the corporate phrasing for a firing that has already been decided but is still being organized on paper. His position, along with 3 others in receiving, was listed for potential elimination pending operational review. He had 30 days. He read it twice at the kitchen counter at 6:30 in the morning, and still asleep. Then he folded it and put it under the ceramic tile where the wall met the shelf. as if the 40-year-old paint of his grandmother's kitchen in Guadalajara could be applied to this new and specifically American weight. He went to work, he signed manifests, he lifted and counted and logged. He ate hot water in his corner. On his break, he pulled up the engineering exam registration page on his phone and looked at the $3,200 figure. He looked at the 16 to 20-month processing window, then he closed the browser and put the phone back in his pocket. In the HR office on the second floor, Melissa from Human Resources and a man named Taylor processed the restructuring notifications with the efficient detachment of people who do difficult administrative work and have learned not to carry it home. Neither of them had seen Jacque's accuracy record before this week. When Melissa looked at it now, she looked at it for a few seconds longer than the others. A woman named Susan in receiving had worked alongside Jacque for 2 years and had noticed, in the quiet, observant way of someone who pays attention without making a show of it, that his lunch bag had not moved from his locker since the previous March. She had not said anything. She had not known what to say. She mentioned it now the week the letters went out to a coworker in the hallway, in the low voice people use when they are saying something true that they are not sure they were supposed to notice. That sentence moved through the building the way such sentences do. Jacque called O'Brien that night after Anne was asleep, speaking quietly for 40 minutes, asking about other warehouses, about the Amazon fulfillment center on the south side, whether O'Brien could ask his contacts. O'Brien said yes. O'Brien asked how Jacque was doing. Jacque said he was fine. He called his mother Judith in Guadalajara on Sunday. She asked about Anne. He told her she was reading above grade level, that she had a best friend at school now, that she had asked to learn a traditional Mexican recipe, and they had made it together last weekend, and Judith made a low sound of deep satisfaction. Then she asked how he was eating. He said he was eating well. She said she knew he was not. He said, "Mama, please." She said she prayed for him every single morning. He said he knew she did. He did not tell her about the letter. He updated his resume at the kitchen table after Anne was in bed. Receiving clerk, Summit Ridge Foods at the top, and below that, formatted in clean lines, the structural projects from Guadalajara, the footbridge over the Lerma River, the overpasses, the load tolerance calculations he had run in the rain. The Engineering Association memberships that appeared on no American list of recognized credentials and that he listed anyway every single time because they were true and he was not willing to leave true things out of the record. He saved the file without printing it. He had always carried things alone. It was the only method he had found that guaranteed he would not drop them. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional tales that touch the heart. And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever hidden a struggle from someone you loved because you did not want them to worry? Let us know. Now let us continue. On a Saturday morning, 11 days after the letter, Brenda Weber knocked on the door of apartment 4B on Livingston Avenue. Jacque opened it with Anne half behind him, openly studying the visitor with the undisguised scientific interest of a child who has decided a thing is worth examining carefully. Brenda was in jeans and a coat, not the blazer, not the compressed expression, and she was holding a plastic bag that smelled in the particular way that certain cooking smells travel through a hallway, like something you had not realized you had been missing. She said she hoped this was all right. She said she had gotten the address from Pate. She probably should have called first. Every sensible instinct in Jacque said no. He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was clean with the particular cleanliness of a person who cannot control much but controls this. The Talavera tile hung on the wall between the kitchen and the hallway, blue and white. The interlocking star pattern, deep and precise, catching the morning light in a way that made it look to someone seeing it for the first time, like something that had always been in this exact spot and would be here long after everything else changed. Brenda's eyes found it immediately and rested there. She did not ask about it. She had brought plantains, she said, pronouncing the word carefully, the way a person does when they have looked something up and are not certain they have it exactly right. She had almost brought a pie, she said, and then decided that was the wrong instinct entirely. Jacque almost smiled. He told her he had masa and dried chiles and that he was going to make something worth the trip. He made chilaquiles. He made them the way his mother Judith made them, the way her mother had made them before that. With the chile sauce cooked down slow until the smell of it filled the apartment with something that was not Ohio at all. That was a Sunday kitchen in Guadalajara. That was a specific and irreplaceable gravity of a life he had left in one bag and could only partially carry in another. He toasted the tortillas himself. He fried the eggs the way Anne liked them. Brenda sat at the kitchen table. Anne sat across from her and observed everything with the calm focus of someone collecting data. Brenda ate the way a person eats when they are genuinely paying attention to what is in front of them, not performing politeness, actually tasting. She said after a moment that it tasted like something that had been passed between people over a very long time. Jacque said from the counter that it had. Anne said, with the flat authority of a person sharing a useful fact, that her father started the chili sauce the night before so it would be right by morning. She said he had been making this dish since before she was born. Brenda looked at Anne with an expression that carried something close to hunger, but not for food. She asked what Anne's father called her at home. Not Annie. What was the real one? Anne said Anne. She said Annie was for school. She said Anne was for when it mattered. Jacque at the counter went completely still. He had not known she had words for it. He had not known that this child who translated for him at the pharmacy and had walked on a broken shoe for 3 weeks, rather than interrupt his plan, had also been quietly translating herself this whole time, holding both versions of her name with equal steadiness, and had understood without being taught exactly what each one was for. He turned to the stove and stirred something that did not need stirring. Brenda talked with Anne about books, about school, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Anne said she was thinking about engineering like her father because she liked knowing how things were held together. Brenda looked at Jacque's back. Her expression was careful and full and quietly sad. When Anne went to her room to read, the kitchen settled into a different kind of quiet. Brenda turned her coffee cup slowly in both hands. She said Melissa had called her the previous Tuesday, just briefly. They had talked for 18 minutes. It was not a resolution. It was something smaller than that and more fragile, and she did not want to push on it too hard too fast. She said she had been learning lately that she did not actually know the difference between being present for someone and simply being nearby. Jacque, drying his hands at the counter, said that was worth learning. She looked at him. He said it again, the same words without elaboration, with the quiet, load-bearing certainty of a man who has paid full price for that particular lesson himself. The morning light had moved across the Talavera tile and fallen in a pale stripe across the kitchen floor between them. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Something had shifted that could not be unshifted. The way a structural element, once moved into its correct position, changes the load distribution of everything around it permanently. The HR review was scheduled for the final Friday of the 30-day window, 10 in the morning. A conference room on the second floor that Jacque had never entered before. He wore the dark blue shirt he had owned since Guadalajara, still fitting precisely because he had made a point of ensuring that it did. He arrived 8 minutes early. He sat across from Melissa and Taylor from Human Resources and placed his hands on the table and waited with a controlled and total stillness. Melissa told him the operational review had concluded that the receiving department would be consolidated from 4 clerks to 2. The retained positions had been selected based on performance metrics and seniority. She paused and Jacque could see her actually look at his file, not skim it, and something moved through her expression. She said his performance metrics were the highest in the department. His seniority was mid-range. The decision, however, was final. Jacque nodded once. He asked whether there were openings in any other department at the same level. Taylor said they would put his file in the available pool. The sentence that means no. He thanked them. He stood and buttoned his jacket and walked to the elevator and rode it alone. He thought for no particular reason about the footbridge over the Lerma River, the pilings in the rain, the two communities it connected every day, the people who crossed it without knowing his name. The elevator opened. Brenda Weber was standing in the hallway. She was not there by accident. She said she had heard that morning and that she should have been told before the review and had not been, and that she was correcting that now. She said there was a logistics coordinator position that had opened the previous week and that she had discretionary hiring authority and that his accuracy record alone. She stopped herself. Jacque said her name. She stopped. He asked, without anger, without the shape of an accusation, the way an engineer asks a structural question because the answer matters before any weight is placed. He asked whether she had known before today. She said no. She had not known. He looked at her. He believed her. She reached into the folder she was carrying. She told him she had also looked into the engineering credential examination process. She said she knew a person on the Ohio Licensing Board. She said that Summit Ridge had been holding an unused professional development fund for 3 years, a diversity and inclusion allocation that had never been deployed, and that it was more than enough to cover the examination fees. She said she wanted to initiate the paperwork with his permission. He asked her why. She let go of whatever polished answer she had prepared for this moment. She let it go the way a person sets down a folder they have been holding for too long. She said, because you are the most competent person in that building, and you have been drinking hot water for lunch every day for almost a year. She said she had noticed in March and had told herself it was not her business, and had gone back to her spreadsheets, and that was the same thing she had done for 20 years. Every time Melissa needed something from her that was not on a calendar, and she was trying late, imperfectly, to stop doing that. She said she was not sure she was doing it right. She said she would understand if he said no. The hallway was quiet. Below them, through the floor, the dock hummed with forklifts and manifests and the ordinary, invisible labor of the world continuing without asking anyone's permission. A man who crosses an ocean to give everything does not stop being whole. He just forgets sometimes that wholeness was never the ocean's to take. Jacque stood in the hallway of the second floor in the shirt from Guadalajara, the Talavera tile 4 miles away on the apartment wall on Livingston Avenue, and he made the choice. Not the small choice, the one underneath all the small choices, the one he had been not making for 5 years. The choice to lower what he had been carrying above his head for so long that his arms no longer registered the weight. He said, okay. Then he said it again. He said, okay, show me the form. The logistics coordinator position paid $27.50 an hour. He did not celebrate this. He came home and told Anne he had moved to a different position, better, more in line with what he actually knew. She looked up from her book. She said with the calm, absolute certainty of someone who has never doubted him even once, that she knew he had worked hard, Daddy. Then she went back to reading. He stood in the kitchen doorway and felt the floor go briefly unsteady in the way it did when he was loved well by someone who had no idea what it cost him to receive it. The engineering examination fund was approved within 6 weeks. Jacque enrolled in a Saturday preparation course at Columbus State Community College and sat in a room with other internationally trained engineers from Nigeria, from Ukraine, from the Philippines, from India, from El Salvador, and by the 3rd Saturday, he was the one at the whiteboard explaining load distribution, because some knowledge does not leave a person, it only waits. His licensing examination was scheduled for the following April. His mother, Judith, received the usual $200 in March. In April, the transfer was $250. She called immediately to ask why more. He said because he could. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said it in Spanish, the old phrase her own mother had used. The child born at dawn already knows how dark the night was. He wrote it on a piece of paper and put it in the drawer beside his bed next to Ms. Rawls' note about Anne. Brenda emailed Melissa in March. Not a long email. 5 sentences. She said she'd been thinking about everything she had missed, and she was not asking for anything. Only wanted Melissa to know she was thinking of her, and that she had been learning how to look at people rather than only at what they could produce. Melissa did not respond for 3 weeks. Then she called from Portland briefly, carefully, and they talked for 20 minutes. It was not a resolution. It was the beginning of something, which is harder than resolution and far more honest. When Brenda told Jacque, he said nothing. He looked at her with the expression of a man who expected good things to happen to people who were paying attention, and was simply not surprised. On a Thursday in late April, Anne came home and stood in the kitchen doorway with something behind her back and was trying very hard to look like nothing was happening. She brought it forward. It was a drawing, colored pencil, careful and deliberate. Ms. Rawls had assigned it for a class project. Draw your home. The real one. The one that matters. Anne had drawn the apartment on Livingston Avenue. She had drawn it correctly. The proportions were right. The windows were right. The front door that sticks in winter was right. She had her father's measuring eye and she had applied it here without hesitation. On the wall in the drawing, in the space between the kitchen and the hallway, hung a blue and white tile, each interlocking star rendered with precision. Standing in the room, a man and a girl. The man tall, the girl small, and underneath, in careful 4th grade letters that she had clearly practiced until they were exactly right, it said, "This is my father. He built a bridge. He's building another one." He took the drawing from her hands. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that Anne put her hand on his arm in the pharmacy way. The quiet, steady touch that meant she understood and was not going anywhere. He brought the drawing to the wall and placed it beside the Talavera tile, leaning it gently against the frame, the ceramic and the paper and the morning light falling across all of it together. His grandmother's kitchen in Guadalajara and his daughter's 4th grade classroom in Columbus, Ohio, sharing the same walls, speaking the same sentence. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and called Guadalajara. His mother answered on the 2nd ring, already in her evening. The bad knee up on a cushion, probably, the television on low in the other room. He told her Anne had drawn a picture of the apartment. He told her the tile was in it. He heard Judith make a sound that was not quite words. He looked at the drawing on the wall, at the 2 figures standing in the room his daughter had made into something permanent on a piece of paper, and he took a breath. He said, "Mama, listen, things are good." And for the first time in 5 years, the length of a breath held across an ocean, the weight of a credential buried in a folder and a lunch bag left in a locker and 300 mornings of hot water in a corner where nobody looked. For the first time, he said it and meant it with nothing held back. No quiet interior correction. A no asterisk trailing the sentence into the dark. Things were good. He said it the way an engineer signs off on a structure he has checked and rechecked and knows, with everything he has ever learned, will hold. Jacque Castillo had come to this country with a daughter who needed a future, an engineering degree that no one here would read, and a ceramic tile that carried the weight of everything he could not fit in a bag. He had been told in 1,000 different ways that he was temporary, that he was low status, that the life he was living was a waiting room for something he had not yet earned the right to walk into. But he had known something those people did not. He had crossed a border and a grief and 5 years of invisible labor to get here. He had already survived the hardest part. Everything after that was just learning to take up the space that had always belonged to him. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more incredible tales of sacrifice, resilience, and the invisible strength that holds families together. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. We read every single one.